Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, where today we are doing a full-length, non-spoilery review of Goldilocks by Laura Lam. So Goldilocks is an adult science fiction standalone, and I'm going to go ahead and read the description from the back of the book. Despite increasing restrictions on the freedoms of women on Earth, Valerie Black is spearheading the first all-female mission to a planet in the Goldilocks zone, where conditions are just right for human habitation. It's humanity's last hope for survival, but when things start going wrong on the ship, the crew begin to suspect that someone on board is concealing a terrible secret and realize time for life on Earth may be running out faster than they feared. So that is the description. So we are actually going to start this with some things that you should know about this book. And the first thing is that there are content warnings for this book. Most notably, I noticed that there is discussion of, as well as a flashback to a previous miscarriage of one of the crew members. So be very aware of that. If you go to the link that I will leave down below, it will take you to Storygraph for the page for this particular book, and on it anybody who's read this book is allowed to tag content warnings, and I would absolutely suggest starting there for your search for content warnings if you need any. So the second thing that you should know that is not immediately apparent from the description on the back of the book is that Valerie Black is not actually our main character. So our main character, and actually our perspective character, is Naomi Lovelace, and she is actually the adoptive child of Valerie Black. So Valerie is actually a main character, just not the main character. That definitely threw me for a loop a little bit when I first started reading this book. The other thing that kind of threw me for a loop was that this book is not linear. So there are chapters that are set far in the future, there's chapters that are set in the past, and then we have the present day on the spaceship. And this is much more prominent in the first half of the book, but it becomes apparent that a lot of the chapters that are set in the past are really more about giving context to what is happening in present day on the ship. And so I was okay with that. It just was a little bit more difficult to kind of figure out where we were in time, because it's not like all the chapters in the past are linear. They're jumping all over the place as need be. And so I just found it a little bit difficult to follow where exactly in time we were, even though it does give you like, I guess it's more like I could figure out where in time we were, but in relation to all the other events that had happened that we were told about. So just be aware. And then the last thing you should know is that this is very similar to a thriller. I do think that you should walk into this book knowing not much more about it, about the actual plot and what happens, than what is on the back of the book and any content warnings that you may need. I will say that the back of the book is not exactly accurate for the for what actually happens, but it's close enough. And once you've read it, you can kind of see why they worded things the way they did. But I will say that I think that you should only walk in with knowing what the premise is and any content warnings you have, and just allow the book to kind of take you along for the ride. Now, because this is a book that you really don't want to spoil anything for, I decided to not do my normal review format, and instead we're going to do 3 pros and 3 cons. So first up, the very first positive thing to say about this book is the premise of this is so interesting. So we normally don't get a lot of science fiction books that are set in the time of Earth's history where we have to find someplace else to go, where it's very clear that Earth is not going to last much longer and we need to figure out what we're doing. So usually when I've read books like this, it's we found the planet and we just don't know how to get there, or we've already found the planet and we've settled there. So this gives it just a different look, or a look at a different time period that we don't normally get, that I find to be so incredibly interesting, but also lends quite a bit of urgency to the mission that these women are on. And so I found that to be very interesting. It definitely drew me in. I still find it to be a really interesting thing. However, getting into the second or the first negative is that unfortunately the premise, where this is more kind of thriller and very fast paced and there's that sense of urgency, isn't really delivered on in the first half of this book. Primarily because I do think that those chapters where we jump into the past and are looking at Naomi's, what has happened in Naomi's life to give context for what's happening now, it just slows the story down tremendously. And so that sense of urgency is kind of lost. Even as things start going wrong with the ship, I didn't really feel a sense of urgency because something would go wrong. And then the very next chapter, we would be jumping back into the past. It's like, keep all those feelings on hold, but it didn't really work, to be honest. So I think that it was good to have the information that was presented in those chapters in the past, but I think it could have been handled a little bit differently to be able to keep a hold of that sense of urgency, that sense of this being much more thriller like. And but unfortunately, I don't think it was executed very well. However, the second half of the book was amazing, which is positive number 2. I really, really liked the ending. So after I read the book, it became very apparent that the first half was really setting stuff up, and the second half is watching the dominoes fall, and you just go along for the ride, and it's really interesting. And even though I thought I knew what the shape of the story was going to be, I was wrong, and it just took me along for the ride, and it was really, really great. Honestly, like, I sat down to read the second half of the book, and I just finished it that day because I found it to be so compelling. And honestly, there are ideas that were brought up that I'm still thinking about. And so I think that that's the best kind of story, the ones that make you think about them even after you've finished reading them. However, to get into our second negative, the characters were not well done in this particular book. Unfortunately, I do think that the author relied too heavily on us knowing people of a certain type to kind of fill in the behavior of some of the characters, most notably Naomi and Valerie. And the remaining 3 women on this ship, Lebdeva, Hickson, and Hart, honestly didn't even get that much characterization. Like, I felt I could guess the actions of Hickson because Hickson was very much a cardboard cutout, but the others, I was just like, this is just not good. I don't even know how Hart is going to react because I just don't know anything about Hart. And so I do think that the characterization was not good. And that wouldn't have been a major problem for me because this is such a plot-driven kind of book, except one of the plot points in the second half of the book really kind of relied on a character interaction. And to me, it wasn't believable. It very much fell flat. Like, even the writing of the interaction was not good, but also, like, we didn't know the characters, so it didn't mean anything. And that really bothered me. It was like the only major hiccup that I had for the second half of this book was those character interactions. And so I think that because we had that interaction, like, the plot was hinged on that interaction, I think that we needed more from the characters in the first half for it to be more believable. And then positive number 3 is that I actually really liked the world building of this. I found it to be very believable in that we're in the near future. We didn't do the things we needed to mitigate climate change, and so everything is it's growing uninhabitable. And I think that Laura Lam had an eye for the details of what details to put in to keep to not take up too much space with the world building, but still give us a really great picture of what's happening. So for example, one of the details is that nobody is allowed to is supposed to be going outside without an air filter mask, because that's how bad the air quality has gotten. And actually it's really made it's a big deal when people are able to take their masks off outside. And I think that says a lot while being a very short, like, not taking up too much space. And so I do think that it was a very good eye for those kinds of details, especially surrounding the environment, the climate change, and how people are reacting to that part of it. However, again, which brings us to our last negative, which is that all the world building surrounding the misogyny of this particular time period, I don't think was believable. So there's two major parts that I had, two major problems that I had with this particular world building. The first is that the President Cochrane, is misogynistic, which is fine. I mean, he used to be in the Senate. He introduced a lot of anti-reproductive rights kind of bills that became law. He got into becoming president. And then as soon as he was president, all these big corporations and government agencies started pushing women out. And like, there was no explanation given why. It's like, okay, is it because like Cochrane represents the majority opinion of men? Or is it that like the heads of these organizations are cronies with the president, and so they're just like implementing his agenda? How does this actually work? And it was further muddled by the author later on in the book when it was said that the people at NASA didn't have a problem with women. It was the organization that had a problem with women. And I really hated that sentence because it's like, but the organization is made up of people, so please make it make sense. And so for me, for that particular aspect of the misogynistic world building, I either needed a little bit more in terms of explanation or I needed less because it just didn't work as is. And the other part of the world building that around this that didn't make sense was we didn't see any of the reactions of the women. So like, there were no mentions of protest. There was no mentions of anybody pushing back, even unsuccessfully. It was just like, so where are the women in all of this? Just letting it happen. Like, we didn't get any of that kind of history, which is compounded, like, and that unbelievability is compounded by the fact that these characters, what we generally get from them, and it may just be because the characters are not well written, is just resignation, that this is just how it is. I was like, where's the anger, you guys? Like, please, like, show me some anger, show me some frustrations, show me some depression, show me something that says that you understand that this is not how it is supposed to be, please. And eventually we do get anger from one character, but it's like too little too late. I could not believe that this is how the vast majority of women, of females, whatever, would react. I couldn't do it. And so I do think that that part of the world building was just not well done. So overall, I really liked the premise. I liked most of the world building, and I really, really liked the second half of this plot. So even though I did have some major issues with this book, I do think that overall, it was still a worthwhile read, especially if you can get through the slow first half. I think that the second half is worthwhile. And I ended up rating this book 4 stars. So let me know down below if you have read this book, if you liked it, are you interested in reading it? Let me know all the things, but that is all I have for this video. So please give it a thumbs up if you like it. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.